Cóż, my wracamy do pracy, proszę Państwa. Przed nami kolejny wykład, kolejna ciekawa prezentacja. Maria Garrido, SVP Brand Marketing Vivendi, Chief Insights and Analytics Officer, Havas Group. Meaningful brands and insights into brand content. Wielkie brawa i zapraszamy na scenę. The floor is yours. All the way. There you go. You don't need it, okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria. I have the tremendously meaningful challenge of keeping you awake after lunch when that digestive nap is happening in your stomach. They gave me the hardest slot of the day. So before I start, I'm going to ask you guys to do a little bit of exercise. I would like you all to stand up, to stretch out, and get the yawn out of your system right now. I don't want to see anybody yawn during this presentation, so I'm yawning. All right. Excellent. Okay, let's get started. This morning you had an opportunity with Alicia to see some of the results of our meaningful brand study in Poland. My objective this afternoon is to share with you a little bit more of the global insight that we have from the study this year and some of the key learnings that we have about how that relationship between people and brands is changing. And as we said before, Havas is now part of the Vivendi group. So the second part of the presentation I will be sharing with you is all about how content and new innovative forms of content beyond traditional advertising are helping to engage consumers in a more meaningful way. Let's start with a little bit of depressing information. We are living, almost in lots of countries around the world, including in Europe, in a time of political uncertainty. There's a lot of social movements, a lot of political causes that are causing a lot of friction between people and their governments. With this context in mind, what we realized in our study this year is that, surprisingly, people are turning more towards brands than to governments to help them create a better future. 55% of the people we talk to around the world want brands to play a bigger part in creating a better future than governments. This morning, Alicia said to all of you that the Polish consumer wants their personality reflected in the Polish brands that they buy. We have a similar result at a global level. 77% of consumers want to buy from brands that share their values. When you look at this, it's really happening all over the world. It isn't just in Europe. It isn't just in North America. People want purpose beyond the product that they're buying from brands. Everywhere, consumers expect brands to be actively involved in solving societal and environmental problems, i.e. more than the governments, as we said. This morning, you saw some statistics about this broken relationship between consumers and brands. With these new high expectations, the situation is quite dire. 82% of brands in Poland could disappear, and people really would not care. At a global level, it's 77% of brands that could disappear. Now, to be honest, North America and Western Europe tend to be the most brand agnostic and have higher numbers. We have nicer, more inspiring numbers of how many brands could disappear in countries like Southeast Asia and South America. But the general trend over the last 10 years that we've been running this study is that that relationship is more and more fragmented and broken. And every year I put this number up, I'm getting tired of telling this horrible bad news that the relationship is getting worse and worse and worse. And last year it was 74% of brands, and that's 3-point jump is the highest we've had in the 10 years we've run this study. But as I said, this purpose beyond product is not just about hijacking a social cause because it's trendy and you think it's going to give you a short-term sales uplift for your brand. It really is about having an honest and sincere conversation with your customer targets. 84% of people think that companies and brands should communicate honestly about their commitments and their promises. Not just about the functional benefits that their product brings to people's lives, but about what the brand is doing for them individually and what the brand is doing for society as a whole. However, again, big gap between what people want and what they perceive brands are delivering. They really only think 38% of brands are actually doing this in an honest and sincere way. So keeping this in mind and this context of the general insights we have at the global level, we do know that brands need to be meaningful to survive. And today, the purpose of the product has to go beyond the functional benefits and has to move sort of into an activism space. Buying has become a political act. And I don't just mean for millennials. I'm not going to talk about millennials today. I'm sick and tired of talking about millennials. I'm talking about every generation. Throughout this presentation, you'll see statistics about boomers, Gen X, Gen Z. Every generation has high expectations as to what brands need to deliver today beyond the functional benefits they bring for their product or their service. Before we go into the details of the global results of the study, I want to share two cases with you, both of which happen to be from Latin America this afternoon, about brands that are working to create that societal cause impact that they can have, dealing with specific values that are relevant and meaningful to the consumers they're trying to target. The first case I'm going to share with you today is from Argentina, and it's called the Equality Bill.
La mujer argentina se fervorizó y reclamó su puesto en la lucha, y fue dueño de su destino.
In Argentina, the gender gap is 27%. There are several initiatives to put the issue on the agenda, but nothing seems to get there. At DDL & Co., we wanted to make our contribution, so we introduced the Equality Bill. We focused on a particular aspect of Argentine currency. There are two 100 peso bills, one with the image of Roca, a man, the other with the image of Evita, a woman. For all purchases made at DDL & Co. stores on International Women's Day, the 100 peso bill with the woman on them were worth 127 pesos, and the bills with the man were worth 100. Unfair? Of course, but the gender pay gap is even more unfair.
Se trata de una acción llamada el billete de la igualdad.
Donde aquellos clientes iban a comprar con un billete de 100 pesos, pero con la cara de Evita,
Compraron como si tuvieran 127 pesos.
DDL lo va a tomar a 127 pesos a favor de la igualdad salarial.
Together, we can show the world that equality is a true value.
The second case I'm going to share with you is from Colombia, and it's for a museum that wanted to bring attention to the deforestation issues in that country.
Deforestation in Colombia is out of control. Between 2015 and 2016, it's increased by 44%. What Colombians ignore is that when a tree is cut, a habitat is lost. And when a habitat is lost, animal species are endangered. We decided to show Colombians what the results of deforestation really look like. Death and bones.
En la Universidad Nacional hay una presentación de una serie de esculturas realizadas con árboles secos.
The National University of Colombia introduces deforested bones. We went to the most deforested zones of the country in order to collect dead tree branches. Artists and biologists worked together to transform the branches into real-size sculptures representing the main threatened species.
Tenemos que cuidar algo y son las proporciones para que nos lo resalte y que esté de alguna manera en el hábitat.
More than a series of sculptures, we created an emotional channel to raise environmental awareness and promote sustainable consumer behavior. Transforming dead tree remains into an exhibition to preserve life. A new digital educational platform was created to support the public's enthusiasm, promoting responsible consumption habits so that we can all contribute in our day-to-day life. Thanks to the strong reaction of the public, more museums across the country want to display the exhibition too. This exhibition became news in traditional and online media, reopening a debate about deforestation and its consequences, and reinforced Colombia's zero deforestation commitment by 2020. Deforested bones. Come and see the species you soon won't be able to see.
Our study Meaningful Brands isn't just about understanding what drives meanings for a consumer with the brand or the product they're trying to relate to. It really is about finding the correlation and the connection between how do you define meaningful, and as you saw this morning, it depends on the brand, the category, it depends on the country, it depends on the target group. There isn't one magic recipe for every single category that's out there. But it's also about understanding how meaning drives business results. And that's what we've been trying to do with Meaningful Brands over the last 10 years. Every time we run this study, it gets bigger and bigger, and honestly, I'm exhausted. This is my last country I'm visiting on the Meaningful Brands World Tour, so I'm happy to be with you guys for this. Save the best for last. 350,000 people we interviewed in over 30 countries, 22 industries we looked at, and there are over 1,800 brands in the study. As I mentioned, this year is our 10th anniversary, and what's fascinating about this is we get to see how the categories evolve, how consumers' relationships change with brands, and what drives meaning, how that shifts over time according to the value system that consumers have. So, why does it matter? As I said, it matters because not only does it bring value for people, but it brings value for your businesses. If we look specifically at the typical marketing KPIs that a brand would examine during a new product launch, a line extension, or any new campaign they're going to put out there, we look at things like overall impression, purchase intent, repurchase rates, which is more important in some categories like telecom than in others, advocacy, and premium price. What we know from this study, and what has been consistently true every year that we run this study, is that brands that have higher meaningful scores have significantly higher performances on all of the KPIs. But for today's purposes, I really want to focus only on two of these. The first one is not in red, it's in white, is advocacy. Today we know that paid media is no longer enough to drive people to purchase or repurchase your product. You have your owned assets, which are important, the shared partnerships you have with other media partners, and the earned media, which is everything people say on social media networks. That particular aspect is important here because people who think your brand is meaningful, 76% of them are more likely to talk and advocate for your brand. And in that sense, the audience itself becomes a media touch point to amplify the messages you want to bring across to your target group. The other one that's important also, and this is really key in certain categories, that this Monday I was in New York and I had a presentation to a pharmaceutical company who has a product that sells at the rate of almost 400% more expensive than its competitor, which is a lot of money. So the key thing for them is, if my brand is meaningful, people are willing to pay a premium price for it. So there is definitely a return on investment. When we look at calculating elasticity of these KPIs, we also see that a brand who increases its meaningful score by 10% alone has significant positive boosts at different levels for each of these KPIs. Most notably, and very importantly, purchase intent grows 11%. And again, that premium price thing comes up again. There is definitely value for a brand to be meaningful. But what exactly does meaningful mean? So, this is the market research part of the conversation. Meaningful for us is defined with 52 different attributes that we look at, that we can categorize into three simple categories. The first is functional benefits. Does the product deliver on what it says it's going to do? Does it shine my teeth? Does it give me, financial advice? Things that are very rational. And you'll see that Europeans and Polish people tend to be much more rational in that approach. The second is personal benefits. What is the brand doing for me? And again, this will be different according to the category we're talking about. So if it's consumer electronics, it's things like helps me connect with the people I care about, teaches me new skills. If it's finance, it's things like saves me money, helps me manage my savings or my bank accounts. It will be different for every industry. And then the collective benefits, which is that activism piece that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. This will be more important for certain categories like retail. Retail has a lot of local feel to it and is very meaningful at a local level. Is the brand transparent? Do I consider them that they're benefiting my local economy? Are they sustainable? Are they a good place to work? This sort of bucket of collective benefits is really important in the overall definition. So, what makes brands meaningful? This morning you saw a chart on where Poland stands versus other countries. And as I said, every country is different. So what you saw is you're sort of sitting as the bridge between Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And as you can see on the chart, you're right over here next to the US. You tend to score brands less high than perhaps countries like China or like India or Mexico or Argentina. But you're much more balanced than some of the more brand-agnostic Western European countries in the sense that you give better scores for functional, personal, and collective benefits in a more balanced approach. So if we look at the global, all the countries, and then you'll see Poland right underneath, at a global level, the entry point really is functional. If the product doesn't work, nobody cares how much nice collective social causes you're working on. The brand's never going to be meaningful. So the rational approach is definitely the entry point. And as I said, things like the product is good quality, it's useful, they give fair prices. Then there's the personal benefits, which if we lump all 1,800 brands in the study into one category, is things like gives me peace of mind, makes me happier, gives me life satisfaction. Okay, now I am going to talk about millennials. If I put millennials up here, one of the things that shows up is helps me show off, which I always find extremely funny. But collective benefits, obviously, is 29% of the global definition. Now, as you can see below, Poland is a little bit more balanced. 39% functional, personal, and collective make up about 60% of the total definition. The only country where I've seen one-third, one-third, one-third is China. But every other country that we study in the study, so all 30 other countries, are really much more driven by an entry by functional benefits before we consider whether we believe the brand is delivering and contributing to our quality of life at a personal level and a society level. What we do know from the study is over the years, 1,800 brands, most brands do a pretty decent job of delivering on the functional benefits. And they're doing average on the collective, not so bad. But where the gap lies is between the expectation that people have on personal benefits and what they perceive that the brands are actually delivering on personal benefits. And as I mentioned before, this isn't a one recipe for everybody. You have to look at your category and understand what those personal benefits that people want and expect from you and deliver against those. I'm going to show you a couple of examples of brands whose scores have increased in the last year in our study, both on personal and collective benefits, and funny enough, driven very much by an activism tone and feel to what they're doing. The first case I'm going to share with you is from Nike. Now, I have to explain this because it's very American, this case. The gentleman you see behind the screen is an ex-American football player. And by football, I mean that American version, not the real football. Okay? So he's an ex-football player. He was fired 2 years ago after a match in the United States because, as many of you know, Americans are very patriotic. And at the beginning of every sporting event, they play the national anthem, and everybody has to get up and put their hand on their heart and swear allegiance to the American flag. This gentleman, in protest of the social and racial injustice for the American police, did not get up. On the contrary, he got down on one knee to protest, and he was fired from his job. Now, American football players make as much money as normal, regular football players, so this man, that was a big, big impact to his pocket. Last year, Nike decided to take this man as a spokesperson to talk about doing the impossible and really defending what you stand for and your values. And I'm going to share this campaign with you, but I want to point out that they had significant increases in both their personal benefit scores and their collective benefit scores. Some of you might be familiar with this. There was a lot of noise after this campaign, a ton of Americans burning their sneakers on YouTube. The results of the campaign are actually quite good. There was a 30% uplift in sales of the products after the campaign came out. And what's most important and most meaningful is that Nike, despite the protests, stuck to their guns and defended this cause.
If people say your dreams are crazy, if they laugh at what you think you can do, good. Stay that way. Because what non-believers fail to understand is that calling a dream crazy is not an insult. It's a compliment. Don't try to be the fastest runner in your school or the fastest in the world. Be the fastest ever. Don't picture yourself wearing OBJ's jersey. Picture OBJ wearing yours. Don't settle for homecoming queen or linebacker. Do both. Lose 120 pounds and become an Ironman after beating a brain tumor. Don't believe you have to be like anybody to be somebody. If you're born a refugee, don't let it stop you from playing soccer for the national team at age 16. Don't become the best basketball player on the planet. Be bigger than basketball. Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. When they talk about the greatest team in the history of the sport, make sure it's your team. If you have only one hand, don't just watch football, play it at the highest level. And if you're a girl from Compton, don't just become a tennis player. Become the greatest athlete ever. Yeah, that's more like it. So don't ask if your dreams are crazy. Ask if they're crazy enough.
I'll share with you one more campaign before we talk about what's so meaningful about both of these. This one is from Gillette. It's very recent.
Bullying.
The Me Too movement against sexual harassment.
Masculinity.
Is this the best a man can get? Is it? We can't hide from it.
Sexual harassment is taking over.
It's been going on far too long. We can't laugh it off.
Who's the daddy?
What I actually think she's trying to say.
Making the same old excuses.
Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys. Boys will be boys.
But something finally changed.
Allegations regarding sexual assault and sexual harassment.
But she says
And there will be no going back. Because we believe in the best in men.
Men need to hold other men accountable.
Smile, sweetie. Come on.
To say the right thing. To act the right way.
Bro, not cool, not cool.
Some already are. In ways big
Yo, men,
and small.
I am strong.
I am strong.
But some is not enough.
It's not how we treat each other, okay? Okay.
Because the boys watching today will be the men of tomorrow.
I'm a mother of 3 boys, and no matter how many times I see that ad, I choke up. I choke up with tears. What's important about both of these campaigns is that neither one of these brands hijacked a social cause because it's trendy or because everybody's talking about it right now or there's buzz. They took the time to understand their purpose. They looked at their brand, they deconstructed the DNA of the qualities and their equity to try and understand how they could drive social change and which messages were the best links and correlation to what they stand for as a brand. And that's what makes them authentic. At the beginning, we said that people want brands to communicate honestly, but they don't really feel that brands are doing it. These brands have taken the time to understand their own values and tried to reflect those values that match the consumer targets that they're trying to reach. There's other examples I've put up here of different causes and different brands that have done a great job of understanding what their brand stands for and how they can help improve the quality of people's lives by driving positive change in society as a whole. Now, there are other ways to inspire more meaningful connections with people. As I said before, it isn't just millennials that expect you to be different and to bring innovative content, but it's every generation we look at. From the boomers, 63% of boomers expect new forms of innovative content from brands, beyond the traditional advertising messages that you give to them. And this can be really, really wide. You'll see that we're talking about everything from films to documentaries to newsletters to loyalty magazines. The definition of content is quite wide, but what they're looking for is a more meaningful engagement with the brands that they purchase. 90% of consumers at a global level expect you to provide these experiences, these stories, these platforms as a brand. And many times what we see is a lot of them want to co-create. They don't want you to just push messages at them. They want to be part of the conversation. The good news is that when we look at all of the content that we studied inside of the Meaningful Brand Study, we find that that gap that I mentioned on what people expect on personal benefits and what they perceive brands are delivering, we can close that gap with new forms of content. In fact, there's a 72% positive correlation between content that is considered meaningful and a brand that is considered meaningful, and therefore driving better KPI results. Let's make sure we keep that link as we go through the conversation. Unfortunately, there's a lot of content out there. I think people are bombarded with something between, I think I heard, something between 5,000 and 10,000 ad messages a day. People are up to here. 419 million people in the world have ad blockers on their phone. People are not interested in the way we used to talk to them as brands. So we need to find new, more out-of-the-box ways to connect with our consumers. And a lot of brands are trying content. They're throwing different things at people, but it's not working. 58% of the content that brands are delivering is totally useless and meaningless to people. And in Poland, it's even higher. 62% of the content that brands are delivering is not meaningful to people. Some industries do a better job than others, and I'm going to explain why the content isn't meaningful. If you look at this chart, we look at all of the industries, and automotive, electronics, travel and tourism do a decent job of delivering the kinds of content that people want. But there's still a lot of work to be done in retail, telco, healthcare, finance, insurance, restaurants. That really surprised me. I expected them to do a better job. But brands aren't really delivering the kinds of content that is meaningful to people and the kinds of content that is user-centric and not brand-centric. To better deconstruct this and understand why, we took 43 different kinds of content, and we looked at how much that content is associated with a brand from the eyes of the consumer. Now remember, we talked to 350,000 people around the world. We also looked at how that content performs, and then we also looked at, do you even want this content from this brand? Because just because you associate a content with a brand and you think it's decent, do I want it as a consumer? And what we found is these also have an impact on the uplift of the KPIs that you look at. Not surprisingly, if we look at familiarity and awareness, more of the sexy content is in this part. Music videos, like you saw with Natalia just a few minutes ago, TV shows, short movies, documentaries, AR experiences. This has a higher impact on delivering on awareness goals. But as you move through the purchase funnel, you see things like web series, stories from artists, organizational tools, applications. There are so many different and exciting ways to communicate and engage with your consumer today. And we should be looking at all of these. But before we go into this kind of stuff, and the reason why so much of the content is not meaningful to people is because a lot of brands haven't taken the time to understand what the role of content is. And I'm going to say this as a Vivendi person, and I hope there's not very many Vivendi people in the room, but it's not about entertainment necessarily. It really depends on the industry that we're looking at. There are 6 key roles that content plays. Inspiring, yes, entertaining, but not always. Educate me, inform me, help me, and reward me. And the expectation for every industry is different. So let's look at some examples. Automotive is a tough category. People want a lot of things from automotive. But the 3 primary roles that content should be playing in automotive is inspire me, help me, and inform me. If we look at beverages, this won't shock anybody, entertain me. You all know that a lot of beverage companies sponsor football teams, they sponsor festivals. They know this is a primary space that consumers expect them to be. If we look at travel and tourism, it's reward me, give me promotions, give me discounts, and help me, inspire me. Every industry is different. I'm going to tell you a little story about one that's not up here. The retail industry in Europe specifically is really about reward me and then educate me. Reward me with loyalty programs and discounts and promotions, and then educate me on where's the food coming from that I buy in your store. Give me recipes. Make my life easier when I get home so that I don't have to spend a lot of time on this. We went to see a client, a European client, who in the retail business, who was spending a lot of money on content all over the place, all kinds of things going on. And they said to us, Maria, my primary client is the young millennial mom with 1 child at home. She's the client I'm trying to drive into my stores. Can you look at our content and everything that we're doing and help us understand if we're reaching her with the fabulous content that we're developing? So we did that. And then we looked at the results and we went, oh, crap. Because it turns out they spend a lot of money on football teams. A lot of money on football sponsorship, which apparently was very attractive to 53-year-old men with high income who don't shop in their stores and don't have children at home. In other words, they're board of directors. So they were buying sponsorships of football teams so they could have these fabulous VIP boxes in the football stadiums, but it was doing absolutely nothing for the primary target group they were trying to reach. I have 15 stories like that. We all love content and we're very moved by entertaining content. But if you don't use content to drive your consumer in, you won't have higher KPI results. I like that one because it's a female-male story. So let me give you a couple other examples. So let's look at the apparel industry. If we look at the apparel industry, on the vertical axis, you'll see where the most associated role that content has in apparel and the least associated. And on the horizontal axis, on your right-hand side is where they expect you to be, and on the left-hand side is where they're not really interested in you being at all. So if we look at apparel, and you are an apparel brand, you need to focus on the right-hand side of this chart, i.e., where are you most expected and where you're most associated. They're not looking for education from you, so you shouldn't really be spending your money here. If 58% of the content out there is meaningless, we could pretty much conclude that 58% of the budget you're spending is being thrown out the window. Let's focus on this. People want high inspiration. It's expected and it's already highly associated with the category. They want entertainment, they want inform, they want reward, and they want help. They want help, but it's not highly associated, which means it's an interesting place for an apparel brand to differentiate itself from the competition. So let's look at an example of an apparel brand, which could also slightly be retail, and what they're doing from inspirational point of view, which happens to nicely match up to what we said at the beginning of the presentation about helping solve societal and environmental problems.
Yo, get up, people. Let's run for the oceans. Come on, let's go. Every kilometer counts, you guys. What's up, Jordan? You gotta save the ocean.
What you slowing down for, baby? Do it, do it. Move it, move it. Move it, move it. What you slowing down for,
Let's do
baby?
it.
Do it, do it. Know you're out of this world.
So what's interesting about this campaign from Adidas is they kind of dealt with several things at once. We know that younger generations really want to be part of the conversation with brands. Co-creation, as I mentioned earlier, is something they expect from brands. So here people had an opportunity to run so that Adidas could donate money to a cause. And then they took all the plastic they accumulated in the ocean and they sold limited edition sneakers that they made from the plastic that they recycled. Very interesting case. The next industry I want to talk about is healthcare. This is one of my favorites, especially in Europe, because this is a category that has so much government and regulatory restrictions that you can't just openly advertise to people like they do in the United States for prescription medications. So for me, it's a challenge that allows us to think a little bit out of the box and find more interesting ways to communicate the key messages of our brand. And the example I'm going to share with you is actually from India. Because here we see in healthcare, it's about helping people is the primary thing they want from you. They want you to help them deal with their chronic illness. They want you to manage, symptoms that they have, whether it be for serious or, cold or cough medicine, whatever it is. Inform me, educate, and inspire me. These are the key areas. I have many, many cases of healthcare brands who do this brilliantly around the world. But the case, as I said, I'm going to share with you is from India. It's for a product called Otrivin, which is a nasal spray for decongestion. And they had a very, very nice idea on how they could apply this not just to people, but to the community itself.
New Delhi is one of the world's most polluted cities. Otrivin, the world's leading nasal decongestant spray, sponsored the Amity Half Marathon by cleaning the air. With very powerful mist cannons, Otrivin eliminated pollution particles hours before and during the race. The tiniest drops of water latch onto chemicals, dust and dirt and fall to the ground harmlessly like rain, reducing pollution up to 93% and creating a corridor of healthier air for the duration of the race. This is a new way to make outdoor events in polluted areas healthier and more enjoyable, simply by helping people breathe better.
So basically what Otrivin did is they decongested the city, not just people's nostrils, which is a nice case. And we had very nice results for Otrivin also in our study this year compared to previous years. So if we try to conclude some of the key messages of our global study this year and the key insights that we've drawn, we're really talking first and foremost that there is a call to action from consumers. They have higher expectations from you as brands to deliver on actively contributing to the quality of people's lives, both on the personal benefits of what you're doing for them as a person, all the way through to what you're doing for society and the community as a whole. This is really important. And we know that really good content can help close that gap in the performance that brands have on personal benefits. The second point is really that those benefits are increasingly important. Yes, functional is the barrier to entry. You have to work as a product or a service in order for people to be engaged with you. But more and more so, we see people shifting towards personal and collective benefits, expecting you to deliver also on those. So it's important that you look at that, and as I said before, deconstruct your content, your DNA of your brand, and look at how you can help drive those benefits for people on a personal and a collective level. And the last thing, and really importantly, is that people are asking you for content. They're desperate for good content from you. And this isn't about spending a lot of money, people. I have some great cases of brands that have spent 5,000 euros on a project. They got fabulous scores. And then another brand who spent millions on a project, and it was disastrous because they didn't understand that the role of content is the first thing you have to look at before you decide what new forms of innovative content you use to deliver that meaningful engagement with people. So to be meaningful, content has to be tailored to your industry. It has to be tailored to the target group you're trying to reach. And as we know, driving meaning for people, delivering on the personal, the functional, and collective benefits will also, in the end, drive your business. Thank you very much.